So we've got another awesome guest on the Wise Wealth podcast. Very excited to get this conversation started. A little bit different, I suppose, from the topics that we talk about, but nonetheless, very exciting. And I'm looking forward to discussing the investment side and the growth side of this. So I'm going to hand over to Aaron, who's going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about what he does.
Oh, hello, Samuel. First and foremost, thank you for having me on this podcast. I've listened to a few of your episodes and yeah, very, very interested. So thank you for having me. So my name's Aaron. I'm the CEO and founder of Whisky 1901. We primarily deal with whiskey investments. We allow clients and collectors the opportunity to purchase casks from some of the most collectible and big distilleries in Scotland, basically.
Okay, amazing. And how did your career start in this space of whiskey?
Yeah, great question. So originally, believe it or not, I left school at a fairly young age, and I worked with my dad as a tiler. I got the very lucky break of then becoming a junior stockbroker for a company here in Marble Arch. I then got approached by a wine investment company to move into wine investments. At that time, wine investments were going through a real boom. Um, the company that I work for, which is now a competitor, believe it or not, is then moved into whiskey investments. So I was one of the main guys there who headed up the progress really in moving into whiskey investments. We felt wine investments started to plateau ever so slightly, and the commodity whiskey investment was one that we had to really pay a lot of attention to. So we moved into whiskey investment. I've been doing it for 12 years now. I set up Whisky 1901 5 years ago, 5 years in June, with the main reason really is to have full autonomy over the casks I sell, and allow education really to the average investor, the average collector, to be able to enter the market and really get a good understanding of the returns that whiskey has. It's not something many investors or collectors are aware of, and I feel it's a market that's extremely interesting and deserves the light of day.
Yeah, I've had quite a fair few conversations about alternative investments. I think some of the ones that I've been speaking quite a lot about is whiskies, cars, and art, and sort of the potential of returns for them. From the side of like whiskey, what is the sort of performance that you can sort of anticipate from investing in whiskey?
It really does vary on each distillery you work with. We as a company, we have an ethos of only working with the best of the best. So we only work with probably the top 20, top 30 distilleries in Scotland. The reason being is over 147 distilleries in Scotland, but not all of these are investment grade. So we tend to work with the big names like Macallan, Downmore, Bowmore. By working with brands like this, it allows the client not just safety and security by dealing with a brand that's well established worldwide, but the returns are much higher as well. We as a company, from valuations that we sent out last year, averaged 9.5% across the board.
Okay.
Bearing in mind, obviously, S&P last year was a great rally of over 20%, which is great. But if you put into account that cask investments is capital gains tax free,
Yeah.
as well as, in my opinion, a product that's extremely interesting, I feel that's not so bad.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, the S&P has got off to a good start this year, but I don't think it's. I think we're in for a road of volatility, especially with all the elections and everything. But I think from anywhere if you're averaging that, I think the S&P average is about 9% over. I can't remember now, the last 30 odd years or something. So from a whiskey side of things, it's. Do you ever get whiskey that devalues? I know that sounds interesting. It's more of a personal question because it's like, you have inflation and you have that side of things that come into to factor. But do you really get them that where they devalue?
Yes, you do. Of course, you do. And this is a very important. Well, the whiskey market goes up as well as down. Many investors come into whiskey expecting it to solely increase over time. Yes, over a longer period of time, 10, 20 years, it's very difficult not to do well. But if you treat the investment like you treat a stock or share, trading in and out of it on a regular basis of every 6 to
Yeah.
12 months, yes, casks can drop in value. And we've had casks that have decreased in value over the short term period. But you must understand the reason why whiskey increases in value is because of the maturity. And the
Yeah.
key to investing into whiskey is to buy at a fairly young age and sell at an older age. Whiskey is a long-term investment. The difference between an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old price-wise, there isn't a lot of difference there. But the difference between an 8-year-old and 18-year-old bottle of
Yeah.
whiskey, there is. You very rarely ever see an 18-year-old bottle of whiskey from the same distillery trading for the same price as of an 8 or a 10-year-old. So
Yeah.
my advice to any investor or anybody coming into the market is this is a great investment as long as you give it time. This isn't a get rich quick scheme. There are risks that are associated to whiskey as well, and as long as you're aware of the risks that come with it, um, it can be a great investment. But yes, of course, it can go down as well as up.
I suppose what can cause it to go down, just out of interest?
Demand.
Just
If
demand. Okay. Surely, if it's limited, surely like these cards, they're sort of like limited, aren't they?
They are indeed, but you must understand these distilleries produce in the region of say 3 to 4 million litres a year. So
Okay.
although those 3 to 4 million litres they're producing a year on average, although sort of 90% or 80% of that is going into blend, there is a small amount that's solely for the single malt market.
Yeah.
However, if there is a lack of demand, and you've got to understand, whiskey, as with any alcohol or a liquid product, is a fashionable product. What
Yeah.
is fashionable today and drunk in the masses today may not be drunk as much in sort of 5, 10 years' time. So it's very important to stay ahead of the time and deal with brands that are established, that brands that have been around for years, like the likes of Macallan, Downmore, Bowmore, that are established brands, not just here in the UK, but established in 180 markets across the world. And that's the most important thing, because if you're dealing with a distillery that's been around since the 1800s, 1900s, you've got a lot of data there that you can work on. You've got where those bottles are being bought, in what quantities, in what areas in the world, and what frequency. So you've got a lot of data that you can work on to give you a good indication of what's going to be happening in years to come. This is why we as a company, we don't deal with new distilleries. We don't tend to deal with any distilleries less than sort of 50 to 60 years old, because
Yeah.
you're very limited on the data you have there. And it
Yeah.
becomes slightly more high risk, because it may be the case that what is fashionable now, for instance, comparing it to say Conor McGregor's brand of proper whiskey, that may be popular now, but that's popular based on one person.
Yeah.
It happens to the popularity of that one person in a couple of years' time, the value of that particular whiskey or that brand is going to diminish. So it's important to deal with distilleries that have that brand appeal, have that foundation, which is very important. But not just
Yeah.
that, they're owned by big conglomerates as well, like Diageo, Edrington, Suntory Holdings, who have billions of pounds to put into marketing, tourism, and continue to build the brand. And the bigger the brand becomes and the more established the brand becomes, the more valuable those
Yeah.
become over time.
Makes sense. I've got a nice bottle of Downmore Quintessence, which is I don't know if you know it, but I had I think it was their 50-year celebration bottle or something along those lines. The problem with me is I just drink it. That's the problem. Is
The opposite.
the
I'm quite the
temptation.
opposite. I love whiskey, and I've got a collection where I drink, and I've got a collection which you can probably see behind me, which I hoard. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm a big collector of bottles and casks myself. I absolutely love the market, but the problem I have is I'm a hoarder. I can't seem to get rid of it. I don't think I'll ever be able to sell it, let alone drink it, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose you've got to start worrying if some of those bottles got value behind you. You need to start putting them on the insurance policy, I tell
Oh, they
you.
are.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite an interesting time as well. Just thinking about it. So, whiskey, from what I'm understanding from yourself, is sort of driven by consumer spending as well, of what they deem as the right time is. What's in favor, what's not in favor. Um, those are interesting levels, because I think I saw something recently about a report about the generation that's coming through now are on the lowest scale of their alcohol consumption and drinking. And I just wonder if you feel that there's that effect that could come in the next 10, 20, 30 years from that generation, because they're not really I'd say they're more educated on the alcohol consumption. Like, I'm going to say, when I was at university 10 years ago, it was like go out and get absolutely hammered and smashed. And now clubs are coming out saying we're shutting down. We just don't have that demand now. to fill out the weeks that we used to do during freshers and everything else. We can now only open on Fridays and Saturdays. And I wonder if you feel that down the line will have an effect on the whiskey market as itself, or whether or not you think maybe that type of investor that's buying that is a bit more distinguished and looking at it from a more of an investment side, I suppose. I suppose it's a consumption side and investment side, whether or not they have a tie to each other.
Oh no, I agree completely, and I believe there's a buzzword going around the industry now for the past sort of 2 years, which is premiumisation in whiskey. So what I do feel will happen with the industry is people are going to be start spending more on top quality brands, top quality whiskies, collectors items to enjoy over the period of time. The thing with whiskey, especially the high quality whiskey we deal with, it's not the type of whiskey you go out and have a heavy night on and wake up in the morning
Yeah.
and you've got 5 bottles of £1,000 bottle each. These are whiskies that are enjoyed over time. So I do feel, yes, there will be a slight effect on the market if there is a lack of, but I do feel what will happen is the top quality products that are being sold, these Macallan bottles, these Dalmore bottles, are going to be drunk more so than, say, your average bottle of, say, Teachers or Bells, so to speak. It'll be more quality over quantity.
That's interesting as well, because I remember seeing a report on Bloomberg about how consumer spending has dropped from the perspective of spending. However, from a luxury goods perspective, is basically the quantity has dropped to transfer to quality and luxury spending. So luxury spending is on the up, even though the overall economy is on the down, which is quite interesting because it sort of reinforces the fact that they're going to be moving to higher quality purchases, I suppose. From your investment side, if you're looking at it, you class whiskey, would you class it as sort of like an alternative portfolio for yourself? Is it something where, as an individual yourself, you've got wider investments, so you invest into different areas and you've got a portion that you look for in whiskey, or because it's your sort of bread and butter on a day-to-day basis, it's one of your main portfolios?
Yeah, I believe so, because it is my bread and butter on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, it is my sort of main investment, but mainly from a case of it being a real interest to me. I love everything that comes with whiskey, and I feel the great thing about whiskey is you can touch it, you can feel it, you can taste it, you can see it, and it's the whole romance that comes with it. We as a company, one of our biggest ethoses here is education. Allow each individual to be educated on the wonders of whiskey, and that doesn't mean solely invested into the whiskey market to make money, but becoming educated on the whole industry as a whole. Because yes, whiskey makes money, but it's also an industry that is driven on it being a luxury item and something that can be enjoyed and something that's passed on through generations. How we got our name 1901 is a nod from my dad. Really, he introduced me to the world of whiskey. We shared a dram in Edinburgh many moons ago. It was a Glendronach bottle, and the cast number was 1901. So this is how we got our name, Whiskey 1901. It's a secret sort of nod to my dad because he introduced me to the world of whiskey. So whatever avenue you go down in the whiskey world, I think it's each road you go down in whiskey it's a great road, in my opinion.
And from a sort of like business perspective, are you seeing the demand for whiskey grow? Are you seeing a downturn whilst this sort of recession is in play, or is it not affecting the demand in your side?
We've noticed if we go to sort of export figures in 2019, exports at 4.9 billion, sorry, and exports last year were just over 5 billion. Although obviously exports coming out of this COVID was at 6 billion at 2022, it does show a stabilization in the industry, which is extremely important. And one thing we are noticing this moment of time is there's been a lot of hype and a lot of talk about a trade agreement with India. India currently pay 150% export duty on bottles of whiskey. That's humongous. There are talks of that being reduced to 75%, and the SWA believe if that does get dropped, it's going to increase exports by £1 billion over 5 years. So a lot of
Wow. Cool.
Resting.
Let me stop you just there. For those that don't know, what is the SWA?
The Scotch Whisky Association.
Okay, fine. So it would increase it by, did you say 1 billion over the next 5 years?
5 years. And the most interesting thing about that is India only accounts for, well, Scotch whisky only accounts for 2% of the alcohol or the whiskey they drink in India. And that's 167 million bottles.
Yeah.
That's down to the export duties they pay. Even in that alone, I believe £1 billion over 5 years is quite conservative, in my opinion. But that is a huge, huge market. But as I said, this is something obviously that we can't guarantee when it's going to happen. Obviously, they've been in talks about this for quite some time. I know the Tories have mentioned this is going to be in a high list of agendas, as well as the Labour government. So if this does come into fruition, which I feel will happen, just don't know when it will happen, it will have an amazing effect on the whiskey market. And personally, I don't think there'll be enough whiskey in Scotland to go around.
Yeah. Why do you think that would even be on the Tories sort of agenda to actually introduce that?
They've got to protect the industry, most definitely. You've got to understand it's Scotland's biggest export is Scotch whisky. So it must be protected. And it's an industry it creates billions for the UK economy annually.
Very interesting. Do you see that from your purchases from your sort of typical clientele? Are they UK based? Are they international? What's the sort of demographic weighting?
The majority of our clients are UK based.
Okay. Is there a reason why you haven't thought of expanding outside of that?
Well, to be quite frank, I feel it's important to have the foundations in place to begin with. One thing I learned from starting this business 5 years ago is patience. It's very important to have the foundations, the right people around you, the qualified personnel around you before you start entering any different market. My most important goal at this moment in time is to establish the brand, to establish the company here in the UK before we start venturing abroad, Europe, Asia, America. I feel it's important that we establish ourselves as the number one company to go to when it comes to whiskey investment before we
Yeah.
start.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially obviously tackling those markets as well, especially Asia. I suppose they're quite large on the whiskey consumption and demand side of things. I find it very interesting, the overall market. I suppose you mentioned earlier there's some sort of tax benefits when you're investing into whiskey. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
So there's whiskey investment and cask is capital gains tax free. We obviously advise any investor to seek their own
Yeah.
independent advice in whatever they do. However, the government class is a wasting chateau, which means it has a shelf life. So the government cannot tax any profits you make within cask investment as long as you trade it in cask form. So we have clients that may buy a 5-year-old cask from us with the plan to possibly sell that cask 7 years down the line at 12 years old. We will then have another client that will take that 12-year-old to possibly 18, 21. And then the next client probably take it from 21 to possibly 25 to then bottle it. The
Yeah.
end, the end goal with whiskey investing is the bottling side. So as long as you're trading in cask form, you are free from capital gains tax. But you must be aware that the eventual goal is to have this cask bottled. Because one of the biggest risks of investing into whiskey is if the ABV, which is alcohol by volume, if that drops below 40% in the cask, that can no longer be called Scotch. And that cask, in the opinion of many, is worthless. You may as well drink it yourself. Because
Okay.
every year, there's a term in the industry called angel share, which means every year you're going to be losing 2% ABV, as well as 1 to 2 bottles in liquid levels within your car. So if you hold that cask for too long, there's going to be nothing left. And this is the reason why the government cannot tax it, is because it's a wasting chateau. If you hold it for long enough, you're going to have an empty cask that you can put in the garden, put some put some flowers in.
Expensive flowers. I suppose, is there an opportunity there then? Let's say you buy a cast and you've got this and you've left it say 20 years. Is it actually a better investment to then bottle it and then hold the bottles or sell the bottles? Is there like a strategy in that sense?
It really does depend. there's pros and cons to both. The reason collectors bottles and bottles of whiskey do very well, and I'm sure you may have seen it on your research about whiskey investment, the Knight Frank Index banding about these big figures on whiskey investment. But that must be taken with a pinch of salt. That is dealing with the top 100 rarest whiskey bottles in the world. So an independent bottle compared to a collector's item like a 50-year-old Highland Park there, for instance, is going to be not going to have as much demand and as much oomph to it as an independent bottle. So independent bottles, unless it's possibly unless it's a real established independent bottle brand, it's not going to have that same weight, and I don't feel it will make money on this as an investment. But certainly selling it to the retail market, yes, to realize your investment, certainly.
It's amazing. So how do you actually make money as a company then? Like, are you charging them storage fees, or how, or are you just brokering it? How do you actually operate?
So yeah, we work as a wholesaler. So as you know, I'm a big collector of whiskey myself. We as a business, what we do is we will buy, say, £1 million, £2 million worth of casks. We will hold a certain percentage of those casks back over a period of time and then trade those whiskies on in years to come to clients. So we make money at the front end of the investment by holding on to the casks. We then trade it to the clients as well, and we take a 10% commission on the profit of the investment once a client exits. We as a business also make money on our independent bottling line. So we bottle casks of our own that we trade on the retail market, and we also offer that opportunity to investors as well. So we recently released our independent client bottling line, where we allow clients to come to us. We will bottle those casks. We will cover the cost of bottling and labeling the cask, but it must be under our brand. The only cost the client will have will be the taxes that will be incurred, which will be the VAT and duty. But yeah, so that's how we make money as a business. We hold on to casks first and foremost. We do have a small percentage of the business which we do broker casks for the big brands like Macallan, where they could be close upwards of, say, 500, 700,000 pounds of casks, where we do broker sort of niche casks. But yeah, that's how we really make our money as a business.
It's a very interesting business. So if I came to you and said I want to set up a whiskey company like Conor McGregor, could you help me?
Well, I don't think I need any more competitors, Samuel.
Yeah. Might find a few more trader recluses like me sat at home thinking, right, what's the best way of getting a bottle of whiskey? Right, this
Let me show you my bottle, actually, if you don't mind, Samuel. This is our independent bottling, which is our collection, which is the Whiskey 1901 brand. This is a Glenbergie 1988, which is 35 years old. We are currently actually entering this particular liquid into a few competitions as we speak. So hopefully in a few months' time, we'll know if we got any gold awards. But yeah, that's our independent bottling line. That's something that I've been working on for about 18 months now. And I mentioned earlier about patience. It's something I've been wanting to do for quite some time, but you need to find the right people to work with, and not run before you can walk, really.
It's a very interesting conversation there, because if you ever wanted to get it into Tesco's, or I've got a big contact in South Africa market, then I can definitely put you in contact, because work very closely with both of them. But yeah, it's a conversation for another day, I think, but definitely something that we work with. We worked with, I own another company that's it's a security company, and we look after the likes of like Stormzy, Dave, Central C, those sort of individuals, and a lot of those are going through that time of where they're looking to basically, or I'd say, bring their own brands to market. You've seen it with The Rock, you've seen it with Kevin Hart with the tequila brands, and I mean, well, what was the other one? Who's the guy that created Aviator Gin?
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, and him, and they all seem to be pushing into that space, and it just seems to be phenomenal growth, doesn't it? It seems like they're really excelling in that space. It's quite a it's an interesting area. I mean, well, I think they all probably looked at Conor McGregor, didn't they, and gone, you know, blimey, look how quick he's gone, and now he's got his, what's it called now, forged Irish stout or something like that.
Well, that is as sort of long-term plans go for us here at 1901. It will be to own our own distillery, and very similar to sort of what Gordon MacPhail have with Ben Romack. You know, it's obviously it's a dream for sort of 10 years down the line, but to have our own brand, our own whiskey being produced to the masses would be yeah, fantastic, certainly.
I suppose so. For some of the listeners, you know, what sort of you know, over, let's say, over a 20-year period, what's some of the returns that you've seen from a say investment into whiskey?
I think it averages on what whiskey you're dealing with. I would say to any investor, take it with a pinch of salt, but anywhere between sort of 5 to 10% a year is something I feel can be achieved. But obviously, that comes with management of the cask. There are associated risks and associated costs that come with it. Insuring a cask, it's not cheap. Management of a cask is not cheap, and obviously the storage of the cask is quite cheap, believe it or not. I think the going rate can be anywhere up to sort of £2 a week per cask.
Yeah.
But this is why it's very important when you are entering the market to work with a company that understands these risks and will manage that cask for you. We as a company, we have our own facility. We lease a space within a facility in Glenrothes in Scotland, which allows our clients to come and visit the cask, draw a sample from the cask, and it allows the client to really enjoy the investment for what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because the facility we have within Scotland as well, it has the technology there behind. Just by a click of a button, we can request details on the cask from a regauge report. A regauge report is basically a health check of a cask, which will give you an understanding of the ABV levels, the liquid levels in the cask, which obviously has indication of the value of the cask as well. But we as a company, we are really trying to move into that sector of technology around the cask investments, because there's a lot of data within this industry, and we as a company are really trying to collate that data into one and allow the customer a little bit more transparency within the dealings of it, and really give that client, the customer, by a click of a button, give him the functionality that a bonded facility will have, or that we as a company will have, so he can log into his portal and view his cask, draw a sample from the cask, or request a picture or request a visit, and more importantly, have a valuation on the cask on real-time basis, like you would have a Hargreaves Lansdowne account or St James's Place, which I feel that market needs to go. We are 18 months, 2 years away from getting there, but this is what we as a company are really starting to work on now, and that's the technology behind it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? From like it's like an experience as well as investing at the same time. It's you know, it's enjoying the process of the investment at the same time understanding what you're investing. Is there any such thing out there, such as like a whiskey index or anything like that?
There is. You have the BC20 index. Yeah, and
What does that stand for, BC20?
this is another company that we don't have dealings with, and they've created a BC20 index, which is a correlation of all of their casks and those trades. We as a company, what we are trying to do is collate all of the information within the industry and have it in one place.
Yeah.
And that's what we're working towards, to allow the consumer, the customer, to have real-time data, which is important. But you've got to understand, obviously, you're dealing with a very different product to, say, a stock or share, or it's something that it needs time to make money. It needs time to mature. So it's very difficult to sort of give a valuation or an asset inside sort of a couple of weeks or a month, or it's even sometimes a year, because the difference between an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old cask from that distillery is going to be non-identical value-wise. So yeah, that's the main difference you have with, say, collecting bottles and collecting casks. With bottle side of the market, there's a lot more data that you can go to from ex-auction prices or prices on the internet that give you a sort of an indicative value of that cask. Unfortunately, we don't have that sort of same technology or that data here on the cask side, which I feel this market really needs at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think we're all moving to data driven, aren't we? So the more you can, maybe in the future we'll see like a whiskey ETF that can be bought that's based on, bottles above a certain age or something along, or casks above a certain age or something along those lines. Be quite interesting to see, wouldn't it, in the future?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, all I can say is thanks so much for your time on joining us. If people want to find out more about whiskey investments and the approach of investing, what's the best way that these guys can get hold of you and work with you guys?
Best way would be Google Whiskey 1901. All our details will be there. Our contact details. If you'd like to hear more or speak to a few of the guys and girls here, please do contact us, and we can answer any questions you may have and see if this is for you or if it's not, or even attend one of our whiskey tastings that we do 4 times a year.
I'd love to do that. I'll come along to one of those.
Please do so. It'd be
Are
lovely
they
to.
are they in London or are they in Scotland?
We do 2 in London, so we have twice a year in London and twice a year in Edinburgh.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll get the dates for those. Do you know when the next one is?
So the next one is going to be in London in June. This is also going to tie into the launch of our next bottle, which I spoke about earlier, the Glenbergie 88, and then the next one will be in July. But I can email you the dates and details across.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, please do. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Aaron. And yeah, excited to find out more about investing in whiskey. Thanks a lot.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me. Take care.